This video is not sponsored and has no adverts. Hello and thanks for joining me for some more landscape photography. And yes, I know it's been a while. In fact, it's been ages. I do have some excuses which I'll be sharing with you during the course of this video. But I haven't given up on the landscape photography. Far from it. So I just wanted to start with a short gallery of images which, if you don't follow me on social media, you may not have seen before now. Those are images I've captured over the last couple of months since I've been away from the channel, and I have to say I've been much more enjoying my landscape photography without all the faff of making videos as well. Now that doesn't mean for 1 second that I'm not going to be making videos going forwards, but I have taken a bit of a sabbatical and been given some thought as to what I'm going to do with the channel. The thing is that when I've been out with my camera and not worried about making videos, I've been able to really focus, terrible pun, on what I'm trying to achieve with my stills. And I've created images that I'm much happier with. Also, the process of creating them has been much more enjoyable and a slower and more thoughtful process at that. So the question then is, what do I do with the channel? Well, one of the thrusts of this channel has always been about the locations, taking you out into the mountains and onto the coast and the epic hikes, the wild camps and all that sort of thing. But I've got 180 videos now with that sort of thing. And I think it's time for me to ease back a little bit on those epic hikes where I have to make every video into its own travelogue. So going forwards, there's going to be some pretty dramatic changes to the way I do things. What you're going to see in this video are 1 or 2 images that I've captured in different photo sessions that I'm bringing together onto this video, and I think that's probably much more what I'll do in the future. In other words, I'll go out and about with a camera, get myself some still images, and if I got something that I think you'd enjoy, I'll make a short film and include it in a sort of magazine style video, bit like this one's going to be. So I'd be interested to know what you think about that sort of thing. What I'm also going to do is include a little bit more background on the processing of the images, because to be honest with you, if I go out with a camera and explain to you how I'm capturing the pixels, very often there's half the story is missing from the image that I then eventually share with you. Now, in addition to that change of pace for the channel, I've also set myself a whole new project which I'm going to be sharing with you from start to finish, and it's probably going to take something like 12 to 18 months, maybe even 2 years to conclude it. The project is this. I'm a member of the Royal Photographic Society and I've decided to go after one of their distinctions. Now, the distinctions require you to submit a body of work to an approval panel who then give you a thumbs up or thumbs down as to whether you pass the standard and are awarded the distinction. Now, you have to provide a coherent body of work based around a statement of intent. And the statement of intent has to be submitted with the images, and you're limited to 150 words. Now, I'm willing to bet that quite a few people apply or go after these distinctions by means of looking at their portfolio, pulling together a catalogue of images, and then writing a statement of intent that kind of encompasses the images. And that's one way of approaching it, I'm sure, but I'm going to kind of go for it in the spirit in which it's intended. So I've already written my statement of intent. And I'm going to share that with you in a moment, and then I'll spend the next probably 18 months, maybe 2 years, taking the images that I need to meet that statement. My submission is going to be titled Nature Fights Back, and I'm going to read my statement of intent exactly as written so that you'll know exactly what this project's going to be about. And I'm going to stick to this. I'm not going to rewrite it halfway through to suit some images that I might have. The idea is I've set myself the objective of going out and capturing the images that meet the intent of the statement. Snowdonia is renowned for derelict industrial and agricultural heritage, which is influential in my photography. In the last decade, it's been rare to find me elsewhere with a camera. My passion for understanding and appreciating history, how we shaped and exploited our landscapes, is balanced by a fascination with nature's relentless reassertion of itself. My intent is a photographic essay telling stories from wide vistas down to intimate details of nature's fight back, its reclamation of industrial and agricultural landscapes. My aim is to inspire others who see through my lens to open themselves up to new creative ideas in landscape photography, wherever they may find nature fighting back. Primarily working on complementary and contrasting elements when viewed collectively, I also feel my subject material affords opportunities for work where each image should stand up as an individual piece, also being appropriately engaging outside the context of the collection. So there you have it. I'm laying myself bare to you. That's 149 words that I'm going to stick to. Now, of course, I'll be doing other photography as we go along. It's not all going to be the project, but I'm going to show you every single image that I take for the project, or there might be one or two that I've already got, which we'll discuss as we go along. Then I'll show you how I put it all together, the running order, which ones make the cut, which ones don't, and why. And then we'll go for the submission, and you'll find out whether I got the distinction or not. Who knows? But I'm prepared to lay myself bare with you, share everything along the way, and hopefully it'll be interesting. At the very least, I'll have a document of what I did, and if I don't get accepted, what I did wrong, so I can have another go. Anyway, that's what I'm going to be doing with the channel. It's going to be much more like the sort of video you're watching now, with little snippets from here and there. And there still will be the odd epic hike. I'm sure there'll still be wild camping every now and then. And I'm not going anywhere further afield. It's still going to be Anglesey and Snowdonia. So let's start off with my first attempt, call it a practice attempt, at an image for this project. Well, I'm down in Newborough Forest in Anglesey, about 1,000 acres of conifer and mixed deciduous woodland backing onto the beach. And I've come across this old derelict cottage. There's very little left of it, and this could illustrate perfectly the subject material for my project. But it's, as you can see from where I'm standing, proved to be quite a difficult composition. If I shoot it from the gable end, which is alongside the little lane, then I'm going to end up really with just a boring lump of stone right in the middle of my image. So what I've done is I've positioned myself back in these bushes, and I can't get any further back, so I'm kind of stuck with what I've got. But what I like about this particular angle is that it gives me this sort of zigzag that runs through the image, and it's allowed me to frame it up quite nicely. I've got some nice golden autumn colour just over behind the cottage, and then I've got this plant growing out which kind of follows the angle of the corner. My backdrop is actually some pale trees with dark conifers behind them, so I can live with that. There'll be a tiny sliver of sky, but not much. But the light is quite good for this because it's just really sort of plain dull grey light, and it's going to give me the opportunity to play with the processing and emphasize the building itself. But this is a really good example of nature taking back what we've done to it. It probably hasn't got long to go before there's barely any remnants of it. Every other wall of the cottage is long gone, and judging by the height of the gable, quite possibly ground level when it was built was probably quite a lot lower. The technicalities of it, because the light is so comfortable to work with, not too difficult at all, I've shot it at f6.3 just to give me an easier time of blending my focus stacks. I've taken 4 focus points. I probably only need 2, but I really don't want to be struggling at all in post with these images. So part of the reason for the direction the channel's going to be taking is the ability to spend more time very carefully thinking about the images. I think I'm pretty much done here with this particular shot, so let's go back and see if there are any specific processes in my edit that might be worth sharing with you. This is the raw file for this image, and the first thing you'll probably notice is that I'm not using Lightroom, and that's quite deliberate. I've decided to switch over to DxO Photolab, specifically the latest version, which is version 5. And I've been using this for the last couple of months and really enjoying it. Now, there's one main reason that I decided to give it a try, and that's how it converts the raw files into a digital negative. It's much more efficient with Micro Four Thirds files than Lightroom is. And what it also does is it controls noise remarkably better. For example, with this raw file, you'll see I've got this really dark area of shadows here, which is obviously going to have to be dealt with because it's almost unusable. And then I've got this dark areas here and in the background. And so with my previous style of photography, I would be exposing as far across to the right as I can. And unlike full frame photographers where they pull their shadows out, I would be having to dial it back, but I'm always running the risk of clipping highlights. Now, using this DxO software, and it's absolutely phenomenal over here, you can see Deep Prime noise reduction algorithm. It's far more subtle than Lightroom's. And when I team it up with Topaz denoise, it gives me a huge amount of flexibility for the creative interpretations that I like to do with my files. When you see this image completed, you'll see how different it is to this raw version. I'm still using Photoshop for its layering capabilities and for masking, luminosity mask, blending images. There's no getting away from Photoshop for that sort of thing. But then I'm also creating a series of smart objects, which I then use for the Nik plugins, which of course are also under the DxO label these days. And so I'm using Viveza for my dodging and burning, and Color Effects Pro 4 as well, for the more creative stuff. So I'll show you some of that later. But if you look at my interpretation of this image, which frankly as a raw file, I must admit when I first looked at it I thought, oh dear, I can't use that. But using the various bits of software, this is my interpretation of it. I've been able to pull those shadows out to create the sort of Z shape that I was after. I've toned down the greens because they look like toxic waste. I've pulled out this tree that was growing out. I've controlled the background and also pulled some detail out here and been able to enhance these autumn colours. So I'll be honest, this is not going to make the submission for my Royal Photographic Society distinction attempt. Think of it as a sort of Mo Farah warming up for the marathon, a few stretches and getting ready, because it was an interesting exercise, but as an image it simply is not good enough. Technically there's nothing wrong with it, but in terms of the subject material and the composition, it just doesn't cut it. So yeah, just a warm-up, I'm afraid. Here it is for you to have a look at. Now let's head out onto the coast for a sunset shot that I've been after for the last few years. Never quite pulled it off. I'm down on the beach. It's a Saturday afternoon. It's the day after Storm Arwen blew through. What I've been doing is trying to get some backlit waves. I've always had a fascination for this rock that sort of sticks up in a V shape. And at this time of the year, we can get the waves crashing around it backlit. And the tide is just perfect. It's a neap tide just on the ebb. And so I've got plenty of time because it's moving quite slowly. Lots of waves breaking around the rocks. I grabbed a couple of handhelds earlier on when I first got here because I had some really nice sunbeams, lots of texture in the sky, some great light. It really is a lovely afternoon here. Now I have got a clear horizon, so I'm going to wait for the sun to drop down underneath the cloud bank. What I'm after is those backlit waves as they crash onto the rocks. Shooting with my long lens, I'm keeping well back because even though the wind is blowing the sea spray away from me, there's still a lot of it in the air and it's a real headache most of the time. So by having a long lens on, because it doesn't really make much difference to the composition, it gets me back out of the danger zone for having to wipe the salt off my grad filter every 5 minutes. One thing I've had a problem with here is that I've had to be constantly adjusting my shutter speed. I've got my ISO at 200 and I'm shooting at f5.6, but because the light is changing quite dramatically second by second, so I'm constantly adjusting my shutter speed fast enough to freeze the waves for the most part, around about 100th, 125th of a second. But I'm having to keep an eye on the histogram because what I don't want is as the background suddenly brightens up, the sun breaks through and that light intensity changes really quickly. So I don't want to end up with a load of clipped highlights immediately behind the rock, because even though I'm probably going to blend the exposures with a foreground that's a little bit brighter to bring some detail out, trying to blend two exposures where one is dramatically different from the other makes it pretty much impossible. Come on, let's have you. Big wave, big wave. Well, as you can see, I've perched myself up on this rock because I wanted to get an angle looking down at my target rock so I could see where the waves are breaking around it. And I've been up here for quite a while and I'm not sure I've got what I'm after. I've had periods of fantastic backlight and the seas look brilliant, but no big waves. Then I've had some fantastic waves and the light has gone. But I don't think I've really got a good shot where the two have come together. Doesn't matter too much because I'm only about 5 minutes from the house, so I can always come down and have another go at it, although this is probably my 10th go at this exact shot. But I think it's all over now. A big bank of cloud has come in. Not long till sunset, but I don't think there's going to be anything to see, so I'm probably going to call it a day. We'll go back and see what I have got and see if there's anything I can work with. Well, now I'm going to just quickly run through how I've set this image up so that you get an idea of how I'm using Photoshop and the various layers within it. But I'm not using much of Photoshop's own capabilities. These layers are as smart objects to use the DxO processing and Topaz processing and that sort of thing. But as I mentioned with the previous image, this one also has some really deep shadows that I've been able to pull out quite nicely and really show the texture within them without introducing any noise whatsoever. I'm really, really pleased with the output on these. So with this one, this is my base raw file that's been processed into a DNG, not much done in DxO. Now the next layer up is using Viveza, and as you can see, what I've done with this is I've pulled those shadows right out of the deeper, darker areas of the rocks. And as you can imagine, this is a really high dynamic range because you've got a very bright sky, or bits of it are very bright, and really dark mid-ground with those rocks. So Viveza's done an excellent job of that. The next layer up, and by the way, you may notice from these layers, what I do is I convert them to smart objects, and that allows me to go back to whichever filter I've used within that smart object and tweak it some more. So the next layer up on this one is a layer of topaz denoise. Now don't be fooled by the denoise aspect. I've already denoised it using Deep Prime in DxO Photolab. However, the topaz algorithm also adds some really subtle sharpening, and I like the way it pulls out the textures in the rocks, and I use it quite a lot because it just works really well with my type of photography. It's not an aggressive sharpening, but it is noticeable, and I really like the way it enhances the kind of 3D feel of it and the textures. The next layer up is some Camera Raw adjustments, and I still do use Adobe Camera Raw because it's the same engine as Lightroom, but there are times when I just want a radial filter or a grad filter, and it's easier just to pop a layer in through Photoshop than go back and do it in DxO Photolab, especially because I often do those sort of things as I get towards the end of the processing cycle. So as you can see there, I've just enhanced the depth of the image by closing in a little top and bottom. Just a very small exposure enhancement using Photoshop. And then finally, Color Effects Pro 4, which is one of the DxO filters, again, just to boost the contrast slightly. And that's the finished image. I'll just show you one of the other images that I got, which is the close-up one. Again, just to quickly run through the order of play in my layers. First off, I'm combining two exposures here because I didn't get enough of a wave on the first one, and I thought, yeah, they kind of work together quite well. And I make no apologies for what I do with my photographs, blending exposures over time, which I do an awful lot with sunsets, for example. It's just part of how I create my final artwork. I'm not in the market for you've got to reproduce exactly what you saw at the time in that instant. What I'm doing here is creating artwork for my own enjoyment. If you like it, that's great. But if you're a purist and you say, oh no, you couldn't possibly combine stuff over a period of time, well, you're probably watching the wrong channel. Next layer up on this one is some topaz denoise, again enhancing the Deep Prime denoise, but used more so for some sharpening. Next is a curves layer, and what I've done with this is I've only added in a curve, you can see up here, using the red channel. So what I'm doing is enhancing the red, the pixels that were captured, and as you can see, I've applied a mask. So I'm not introducing any additional reds into the foreground rocks. I'm really only interested in what it's doing in the sky and the translucence of the waves. Next layer up is Color Effects Pro. That's where I'm working on my contrast and a bit of dynamic lighting. Next layer up, Camera Raw, a little bit more dodging and burning on that layer to enhance the sort of vignette effect, so it draws your attention through to the waves. And then finally, again, another topaz run here, using a smart object, and this is using topaz sharpen. And all I wanted to do with this was just to sharpen up the textures in these areas here. And you'll also notice, still got this curves layer highlighted, got the opacity down at 76% there. I don't always use 100% opacity, so I'll create an effect and then dial it back to a level of subtlety that makes it look more realistic, I suppose. So yeah, that final little bit of sharpening, which you almost certainly can't see on this video, but which certainly when I show you the images at the end, I'll put them all together in a little gallery as usual, you'll see that it really does pop those textures in that foreground. And so that's the direction of the channel. I've got a project. I'm going to be just going out taking pictures and sharing those pictures. A little bit more background on processing and kind of putting it together as a sort of magazine style so that I'm not going out with my camera and constantly being distracted by trying to make a video at the same time as capture stills, because I can actually do a better job of it here when I've got time to think about it and put it all together. I don't mind that at all. But when I'm actually out with a camera, I really want to be concentrating on the photography. So I hope you like the direction of the channel. If you don't, I'm really sorry. I did have quite a burst of new subscribers a few weeks ago after a video that I did about gear and a Q&A. This is probably the first video they've tuned into since they subscribed. So if you're one of those people and you're thinking, hang on a minute, I didn't sign up for this, I'm really sorry. Please feel free to unsubscribe. I won't be offended. But anyway, going to leave it there for this one. Thank you ever so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, why not subscribe now and join me next time? Cheers.